In this video we're going to talk about what PHP is. So we're going to take a look at PHP from the ground up, explain what we need to run it and exactly what it's used for in the next video. In this video we'll take a look at an example as well, just to sort of get you going with the idea of what PHP actually is, because it's sometimes quite difficult when you're learning a language, particularly with web development, to learn exactly how everything works. So we're going to talk about web servers, we're going to talk about MySQL, and we're going to talk about how we sort of create a file and how it's interpreted on the server side. Now this does all sound very complicated, but it's actually very easy to understand. So hopefully with this example it will make it a little bit easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is hop over to the PHP homepage. It's php.net. Okay, so PHP originally stood for personal homepage, and it was built with building dynamic websites in mind. So building, say, a guest book, which is quite an old thing now, but building a guest book where users could come onto your page, type a message, click send, store it somewhere, so then when another user came to the web page it could retrieve information. And this is sort of the complete opposite of a static web page, whereby all of the markup is written. So for example, if you have a text editor and you write, say, a paragraph on the page, hello, this is a paragraph, that's a static, this would be a static web page. I know obviously we don't have the doc type and the head and the body and stuff, but serving this is static content. Now with PHP this allows you to create a layer of dynamic or a dynamic nature to your web pages. Now PHP can be used offline, so it can be used on the command line, but we'll talk about that we'll sort of touch on that in a moment. So PHP now stands for PHP, which is the first P, which is odd. It's a recursive acronym, so the first P stands for PHP, and the second and third, the HP, stands for Hypertext Preprocessor. That sounds complicated, but as you know, hypertext is like in HTML, so hypertext markup language, and it's a preprocessor, so it processes something on the back end and then serves markup, serves styles perhaps, although you'd probably have them included in the external style sheet. But that's basically what it is. So it's a recursive acronym. So when someone says to you, what does PHP stand for, you can say it stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. Well, that's probably not massively important, but it's always good to know. So if you want to create dynamic web pages, PHP is a really good choice, and it's a good choice for a few reasons, and this is probably why it's so popular. It's extremely easy to get started with. Now that's not to say that it's easy to actually write code in, because when you look at advanced PHP it can be quite difficult. However, if you come from an object-oriented background like Java, you'll probably find it fairly strange that it's a loosely typed language, which means you don't have to declare variables before you use them, you don't have to declare types of variables. But if you come from no programming background, you'll probably find it quite easy to pick up. It's popular, and that's probably a reason why it's a good language to work with, because it's easy to get help anywhere you need. So if you're stuck on something, there's going to be so many different resources that you can actually utilize in order to make your learning experience a lot better. And it's free as well. You don't pay for it. It's open source. You can go in, you can download the source code for it if you happen to want to modify it, but basically it's free, which is good, because then you can effectively install a web server, which we'll talk about in a moment, like Apache, which is also free. You can then install PHP, which is free. You can install a database solution like MySQL or another one, which is free. So you can effectively start getting started building websites on your local machine. You don't need to host a website, and you can get started for free. So, as per the PHP website, PHP is a popular general-purpose scripting language that's especially suited to web development. So remember, we don't need to use it for web development. It's fast, flexible and pragmatic, and PHP powers everything from your blog to the most popular websites in the world. And we'll take a look at them a bit later on, or take a look at the examples, and we'll talk about perhaps what they need to operate. So what do you need to run PHP to create a dynamic website? Well, you'll need a web server like Apache. So let's just bring Apache over here. So Apache is a software foundation, but if we go ahead and look under projects, we can see Apache web server here. There we go, Apache HTTP server. So you can go ahead and download that. What you would typically do is install that on your computer. You would then have access to a web server. We'll look at this in a moment. What you would then obviously need to do is download and install PHP, sort of couple that with Apache so that Apache can actually process the PHP code you write, and that's it. Now it's a lot easier to get started using a pre-installed or preset package like WAMP. So this runs on Windows, and it's basically Apache, PHP and MySQL bundled together. And what this means is you'll get a web server, you'll get PHP, and you'll get a database solution, so to store, I don't know, comments on your blog or your blog posts, all installed together. So you don't have to manually go to Apache to download Apache and install Apache. You won't need to go to PHP and then install it as an Apache module, and you won't need to install MySQL separately. So something like this, if you download it, will allow you to sort of get started really quickly and easily. And this is probably one of the most popular ways to go ahead and just get started with local development. So you can install this on your PC. Now effectively what happens is your PC will become a web server, and that will mean that you can then access your server via your browser, and we'll take a look at an example of that later. Now if you're using something like Mac, you can actually download something like MAMP, which runs on OS X. So yeah, for OS X and Windows here. So this is also free, as is WAMP, and just gives you the ability to again install Apache, MySQL and PHP. And this is typically called, well, if you install it on Linux, it's a LAMP stack. So Linux, Apache, MySQL and PHP. The acronym is LAMP. So if you ever come across that term, you'll know. So it's easier to run a software package like WAMP or MAMP for Mac, and installs everything you need basically. So in this case, what I would do is I have an example over here of a folder I've created within my local web server, and if we just go ahead and take a look at a folder within my web server, I'll just show you this here. So if I bring this over, basically htdocs is Apache's default name for where you store your root files. This is your sort of root web server directory. So you can see that localhost is basically just a name for my local server. This could be 127.0.0.1. It works in exactly the same way, well, more or less exactly the same way. And basically what this does is it allows me to store files in here and then view them within my server. So let's go ahead and just create a new file. So let's save this. I'm going to go ahead and save this within this directory that I just had open. I'm going to save that as index.html, and I'm going to go ahead and just type some text in here. Now what that's done is when you refresh, index.html will be hit by default. So if I was to rename this to something else, you'd see it in that directory. But now what this is doing is it's serving an HTML page. We can go ahead and type it in here if we want, and that basically just contains some text. There's no markup in there. So that's basically what you would use to access your local server. But if you have PHP installed, that's what we want to learn. So, how does that work? Well, files are processed on the server side, and whatever you want to be output is output. It's important to realize that your PHP code that you write, and we'll write some code in just a second, will never be visible because it's interpreted on the back end and then served to the user. So if you imagine you've got a server up here somewhere and you've got lots of clients connecting to this server and requesting index.html or index.php, as we'll look at in a moment, the web server will basically take this file, it will send it off to PHP and say, can you interpret this for me? PHP will interpret that file. It will spit out whatever's requested within that file. So we use something called the echo statement, and we output something, and then you see what's output on the page. So when you right click and view source on a PHP file, you'll never see the PHP code. It's hidden, or not hidden, but it's interpreted and then served to the user as just a plain or a text HTML file. So let's go ahead and instead take a look at creating a index.php file. Let's just delete index.html. This is going to be index.php. So I'm renaming this with this extension. And this sort of works out of the box as by default. So you can go ahead and just output this and it should just work. So let's just change this to .php. And this is our index.php file. If you get an error here, then something's wrong. If you've installed something like WAMP or MAMP, then it shouldn't error. But if it does, then something may be wrong. You may want to just make sure that your server is actually running. I'm actually running XAMPP on my local PC, which is another sort of version of these bundles. And you can see that Apache is running. So have a look around for a controller like this that lets you start your Apache service. And obviously with PHP you don't start that as a separate service, it's not required. So for this index.php file, let's go ahead and just write some code. Now don't worry if you don't understand what this output looks like. We'll go ahead and explain it as we go along. But if I was to go ahead and interestingly just type text here, now how do you think that the web server is going to handle this? Well, because PHP is only rendered or interpreted with a certain sort of rule, if you like, there's a symbol or collection of symbols we use to determine the start of a PHP document. This just outputs text, and it's exactly the same thing as the HTML file. It looks the same, and it's outputted with the same content type. However, if we use this, which is a greater than sign or a less than sign, a question mark and PHP, that then signifies the start of a PHP document. So when I go ahead and type text down here or test down here, when I go ahead and refresh, we actually get an error. Now this error is PHP actually in trying to interpret this file and erroring, because this is not valid PHP syntax. So let's go ahead and just create an example here, and we'll actually see how we can output something. And we do this using echo. So what we're now saying to PHP is, please output what I'm about to tell you as content type, text, HTML or whatever. So now I can say test, and what that will do is it will simply output test on the page. So that's being interpreted by PHP, and although it's been interpreted by PHP, we don't see the PHP code in the source of the web page. We just see what we've instructed PHP to output. So if we were to create a more complex example, so for example create a for loop, and you may have seen examples like this if you've worked with programming languages before. All I'm going to do here is I'm going to loop through numbers 1 to 10. And again, don't worry if you don't understand the syntax here, it doesn't matter too much. So I'm going to output X for each loop of this, and then I'm going to go ahead and create an if statement, which again, if you've programmed before, you'll have seen. We've got if X doesn't equal 10, output or echo a comma. So we've got two echoes here, and these are basically just, they won't be separated by lines or anything like that. You'll see them basically just echo the number, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way up to 10, and with a comma if it's not the last number, and we get a result like this. So when we view the page source, you can see that we just get this plain output. There's no PHP code here. Now a user will never be able to see your PHP code unless they have some kind of access to your web server, which hopefully they don't if you are trying to keep that private. But that's basically, you know, how that kind of works. So files are processed on the server side. You can output markup that's viewed by the user. You can embed PHP. This is originally what PHP was sort of created for. If you were to go ahead and say doctype HTML, and say HTML here and HTML here, let's close off that PHP tag. This is a closing PHP tag. You notice I didn't have one when we didn't have anything preceding this because it's not required, but if we want to put markup afterwards, it is required. So here I can do head, if you're familiar with HTML, and then I can go ahead and create a body element, and then I can just indent this. So essentially what I've done is I've embedded this PHP code within my body of the page. Now things like this aren't necessarily recommended because I suppose you could class this as logic. Well, it's sort of arguable, but generally what you do is you do all the processing at the top of your page, and then you would output your content down here. So you would have your sort of views separated from your logic, if you like. But now what this has done is it's created a you know, don't worry about the indentation of the markup in the source. That's to be expected when you're working with dynamic languages. But you've got a doctype, a head, a body, HTML sort of wrapping everything, and then you've got your PHP output in between. So just because you can't see the PHP code doesn't mean it's there. It's there on the server side for you to see and do what you want to do with. So there is a lot more to PHP than this, but hopefully that gives you the fundamental understanding of how you install, how you access your htdocs or whatever server you're using. There are plenty of servers to choose from: Apache, Nginx and others, including Microsoft IIS. But yeah, whatever server you choose and you have PHP, is interpreted on the server side and spat out to the user exactly what you want to output. And that's basically what PHP is.